God and said that they should have one wife, and concubines they should have none. And I read this throughout so many of the different references in the Book of Mormon, and it confused me. You know, I started looking at the Bible and at the Doctrine and Covenants, and each one of these things said something different. The Doctrine and Covenants revelations that were given to Joseph Smith commanded polygamy, and how God could change from saying it was an abomination in the Book of Mormon to commanding Joseph Smith's church to live it, saying that it was necessary. This just didn't make sense to me.
Throughout my life, I would hit this wall where something didn't add up. And I'd go to my dad and I'd say, "Dad, this just doesn't make sense to me. What about this and this and this? They just don't add up." And he'd say, "Well, son, just put it on a shelf, and when God's revealed more truth and knowledge to you, then you'll be able to understand it." And I was haunted by those things that just didn't add up.
So I kept studying more and more about this, and read in the Bible places where he said that a man and his wife should become one flesh. And why did God give Adam one wife? You know, he could have given him more at that point if he wanted us to live polygamy on the earth. And it just didn't, the whole thing just was totally confusing to me. From everything that I started to study, polygamy was absolutely not commanded by God in the Bible. And I remember times when I would try to talk to my husband about this. And one time in particular, I remember showing him in 1 Timothy, and I said to him, "Why is it that God says here that bishops should be the husbands of one wife?" And he just laughed and kind of passed it off and said, "Well, that was back then. Since then, we've had the new and everlasting covenant revealed to Joseph Smith." And I said to my husband, "How is it that it says here that a man that's a leader in the church needs to be able to manage his own family well?" And I said, "I don't think that you're managing your family well." And he says, "In what way am I not managing my family well?" And I said, "Well, you're never home for one thing. Not only that, but you have so many wives. We're all unhappy. We're all lonely. You're never a father for your children. They don't even know you. And so I don't consider that good management of family."
And I asked if I could drive in my car up to Flathead Lake, and they thought I wanted to go and pray and thank the Lord, you know, for the wonderful opportunity I've had of joining this group, and I just needed to get away. Way out in the middle of nowhere was this little Christian church. So I slipped inside that only because I was bored and didn't have anything else to do that Sunday. I began to hear for the first time about what the biblical grace meant. I learned that I was a sinner and began to understand more what Jesus actually did for me on the cross. So I was able to attend for about 4 Sundays, and I was followed. And they found out back on the farm that, and I was confronted when I came back, "Have you been going to that little church?" All this rage broke loose. Didn't I know I was committing spiritual adultery, and I was worshiping at the altar of Baal by going into this Christian church? So I was ordered to hand over the keys to my car, which I dutifully did. On the back of the property was a large building. It was finished on the outside, but unfinished on the inside, except for one small 8x10 room. And that's where I was put until I could repent of my sin. They wanted me to come into the meeting and tell this horrible sin I did by going to the Christian church and to denounce the Christian Jesus. And I wouldn't do that.
When Joseph Smith introduced plural marriage, the first couple of women that he married were single women. But then about the next 9 or so were women that had living husbands. And this is one of the problems in Mormon historical circles in trying to defend Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy. One of the things in the Doctrine and Covenants in section 132, it talks about if a man has 10 virgins, he has not committed adultery. I don't see anything in Joseph's revelation that allows for him marrying married women with living husbands. That seems to fall outside of even his own revelation. How do you explain his marriages to married women that have living husbands? When I got into college and was going to the Mormon Institute of Religion, I started asking questions in class. And finally, the teacher took me aside one day and he said, Sandra, you've got to quit asking questions in class. You're disturbing a girl that's thinking of joining the Mormon church. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, why didn't you just answer the questions? But I was silenced.
After I joined the TLC, I started to study the history of Joseph Smith. What I saw was that Joseph Smith had rewritten his own revelations, and that Joseph Smith had lied in many cases publicly and denied practicing polygamy. Joseph Smith lied about polygamy for the same reason that anybody would lie about anything that they did that was wrong. If something was clearly of God, why would you lie about it?
I knew I can never be good enough to go to heaven. I can never be that good. And what was funny is that's the truth. I couldn't. Requirements were too high. And so I really started searching for the truth at that point.
I'd been told that everyone outside my religious circle was wicked and evil, that they hated me. My father had told us that if they knew who you were and what you believed, they would chew you up and spew you out. When I married, we lived on 3rd Avenue and T Street, right in Salt Lake City. And Ruthie was a woman who lived across the street. And Ruthie had this little habit of stepping really close to you when she'd talk, and she'd get in my personal space, and I would keep stepping back, and she would keep stepping forward. And as we were doing this little dance on the parking strip one day, she reached out and grabbed my arm. And I felt the love of that woman and saw the love in her eyes. I knew she loved me. And I knew I'd been lied to. For not everyone out there hated me. And if they had lied to me about this, what else had they lied to me about?
Well, the thing that keeps them in and makes them so they don't even question is because they've been taught since birth that their salvation is in that group, and that's the only place it is. That if they leave, they'll go to hell. Just as simple as that.
I said, Lord, if these are your people, send me to hell. I don't want to be where they are.
And I consciously chose to go to hell than stay in the group. I remember that. I remember that decision of making that choice. But I knew somebody who would help me. And so we made the plans 3 days after I turned 18. In the middle of the night, they were going to meet me in front of the house, and I was going to be ready. And that's what I did. That's what I did. And I remember getting in the car and driving away, and I remember such a sense of freedom come over me.
In the polygamous group where they prearranged the marriages, the girls got a week's notice that they were going to get married so they could throw a dress together or borrow one, and the guys found out the day before, and they got married. I got a phone call from Roy Johnson, the leader of the group. He says, "Do you know so-and-so?" I said, "No. I knew of her, but I didn't know her." And he says, "Well, I want you to go meet her this afternoon and get married tomorrow." If I say no, I'm out. Pack your bags, you're out of the community, you're out of the religion. You're ostracized because you don't rebel against the prophet. So I married that gal that I didn't really know.